backward until vertebrae cracked from the strain. His weapon clattered to the floor as his nervous system short-circuited, smoke rising from his tactical vest where the current had welded metal components to his chest. The smell was horrible, burned meat and melted plastic, the acrid stench of electronics dying violent deaths. When the current finally earthed through steel piping, the operative collapsed like a marionette with cut strings, his body still twitching as residual electricity discharged through cooling flesh. "Two down," Wick gasped, rushing to Weber's side while Emma stared at the carnage with traumatized silence that belonged to children who'd watched too much death in spaces too small to contain its brutality. Weber was on his knees, hands pressed against the wound in his side where shrapnel had punched through muscle and possibly nicked his kidney. Blood flowed steadily between his fingers, not the bright arterial spray that meant immediate death, but the dark venous flow that promised a slower, more agonizing end. "How bad?" Wick asked, helping Weber to his feet. "Bad enough," Weber gasped, his face gray with shock and blood loss. "But I can move. Have to move." Emma clung to Weber's uninjured side, her homework bag forgotten as she pressed her small hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding with desperate hope. "Papa, you're hurt. We need to go to the hospital." "Soon, little one," Weber whispered, his hand shaking as he touched her face, leaving a streak of blood on her cheek. "Papa just needs to—" The third operative stepped through the breach. He moved with calculated precision, weapon raised but not aimed, confident in his tactical superiority. This one was older, calmer, with a diagonal scar across his left cheek marking survival in places where mistakes meant shallow graves. "Weber," he called in German-accented English, his voice echoing through the chamber with the confidence of someone who controlled the situation. "You have something that belongs to the German government." The operative's eyes swept the chamber, taking in the two dead colleagues, the blood-stained concrete, the wounded intelligence officer and terrified child. Professional assessment, calculating threat levels and tactical options. "Return the evidence and the child's death will be quick," he continued, stepping deeper into the chamber while maintaining sight lines to all three targets. "Resist, and I will ensure she suffers appropriately." Weber tried to respond, but blood loss was making him dizzy, the shrapnel wound stealing strength with each heartbeat. He pointed toward the water main controls with a trembling hand, understanding flickering in his eyes as he saw the emergency flood valves that could turn the maintenance chamber into something else entirely. Wick understood. The facility could be flooded within seconds, turning the concrete chamber into a death trap. Industrial water pressure designed to fight fires and flush sewage systems, unleashed in a confined space. But they'd have to time it perfectly, and someone would have to stay behind to operate the controls while water filled the chamber. "I'll do it," Weber said, reading the tactical equation in Wick's expression. His wound was mortal, maybe not immediately, but the blood loss would kill him within the hour. "I'm finished anyway. Give me 2 minutes, then open the valves." "Emma," Weber gasped, pulling his daughter close despite his wound. "Remember what Papa taught you about swimming? You hold on to the American man, yes? Hold tight and don't let go." "I don't want to swim, Papa. I want to go home." Emma's voice was small, confused, still not understanding that the adult world was about to consume her completely. "I know, little one, but you must be brave now. For Papa." The operative was advancing, weapon trained on Weber, probably calculating whether to take the shot or secure the evidence first. Professional killer's mathematics: eliminate the threat or recover the asset. Weber's hands found the manual override controls, industrial levers designed to be operated by maintenance workers in coveralls, not dying intelligence officers protecting children who weren't their own. His finger slipped on steel worn, smooth by decades of use, blood from his wound making the controls slick. "What are you doing?" the operative demanded, raising his weapon as he realized Weber's intent. "Step away from those controls." But Weber was already throwing his full weight against the valve assembly. "Now!" Weber shouted. The effort tore his wound wider, blood spraying across the concrete floor as damaged tissue gave way under the strain. Industrial pressure water exploded into the chamber from multiple sources: cooling lines, fire suppression systems, main distribution pipes, all converging to turn the concrete space into a churning cauldron of mechanical fury. Water hammered from overhead sprinklers, blasted from wall-mounted emergency systems, erupted from floor drains in reverse flow that created a torrential hell. Emma screamed as water erupted around her feet, then her knees rising with terrifying speed. "Papa! Papa! What's happening?" "Hold on to me," Wick shouted, grabbing Emma and lifting her against his chest as water swirled around his waist. The current was already strong enough to knock a child off her feet. The operative tried to reach the breach, but the current was too strong, the chamber filling too fast. Water reached his waist, then his chest, dragging him back into the concrete tomb as his tactical advantage dissolved into survival instincts. "Don't let go!" Wick yelled to Emma over the water's roar, one arm wrapped around her while the other fought to maintain balance in the churning flood. She clung to his neck with desperate strength, her face pressed against his shoulder. No gunplay in the rising water. Weapons became useless weight when drowning was imminent. No tactics when survival meant keeping your head above surface that rose with terrifying speed. Just hand-to-hand combat and floodwater that turned every breath into a tactical advantage. The operative lunged through the water toward Wick and Emma, desperation overriding training as he realized his tactical situation had become a death trap. His hands reached for Emma, either as hostage or human flotation device. "No!" Wick twisted away, keeping Emma above water while the operative's fingers clawed at his jacket. The child's weight made maneuvering difficult, but her terror gave him focus that cut through the chaos. The operative was strong, trained, desperate. His hands found Wick's throat underwater, fingers digging for pressure points that would end the fight even as they both drowned. Combat training that continued functioning even when rational thought shut down. Emma's scream pierced the water's roar as Wick disappeared beneath the surface, the operative dragging him down. "Help! Somebody help!" Underwater, Wick drove his knee into the man's solar plexus, forcing him to exhale precious air in an explosion of bubbles that rose toward a ceiling they might never reach. The operative's grip loosened for just a moment. Enough time for the Wick to break free, to surface, to gasp one breath, while Emma's small hands pulled at his jacket. "I'm here." Wick surfaced, spitting water, pulling Emma higher against his chest. "Hold on." The operative surfaced behind them, gasping, reaching again for Emma's legs. Wick spun in the water, driving his elbow into the man's temple with kinetic energy amplified by drowning desperation. When the operative finally went still, his body floating face down in water that continued rising toward the chamber's ceiling, Wick fought his way to the rear tunnel access, where Weber struggled with emergency controls. Emma was sobbing hysterically, her pink headscarf soaked, her small body shaking with cold and terror. "Papa! Where's Papa?" Weber was slumped against the valve controls, the shrapnel wound in his side pumping blood that mixed with floodwater and spreading crimson clouds. The industrial accident had torn through muscle and possibly nicked his kidney, not immediately fatal but mortal nonetheless. "Can't make it," Weber gasped, water now chest-deep and rising, his strength finally failing after hours of violence and terror. "Take Emma. Promise me." "Papa, no." Emma fought against Wick's grip, trying to reach Weber through water that was already too deep for her to stand. "Papa, come with us." "I can't, little one," Weber whispered, his face going gray as blood loss and exhaustion overwhelmed him. "You go with the American. He'll keep you safe." "I don't want to go. I want to stay with you." Weber tried to reach for her face one last time, but his hand fell short, fingers still twitching as consciousness faded. "I promise," Wick said, but Weber was already slipping beneath the surface, his body too weak to fight the current that dragged him toward drainage systems designed to handle industrial accidents, not human bodies. Emma's scream echoed through the concrete chamber as she watched Weber disappear beneath water that continued rising. "Papa!" Wick grabbed Emma and headed for the tunnel access, her desperate struggles making the escape treacherous as water reached the chamber's ceiling. Behind them, Weber's final words bubbled up through industrial pressure that claimed him completely. Tell her Papa Klaus loved her." Emma clung to Wick with desperate strength, her sobs muffled against his shoulder as he fought through the flooded tunnel toward whatever safety Berlin's underground might offer. "He's gone," she whispered, her voice broken. "Papa's gone." The water kept rising, carrying away the dead and nearly drowning the living, while somewhere in Berlin's underground darkness, an 8-year-old girl learned that even the adults who promised to protect you sometimes couldn't keep those promises. But sometimes they died trying, and sometimes that had to be enough. Chapter 5. The bunker was carved from living rock, a Cold War relic designed to survive nuclear war. Industrial lighting cast harsh shadows across concrete walls lined with military equipment. Wehrmacht vintage weapons cached since 1945. More recent B&D installations, decades of conflict preserved in steel and gunpowder. Wick's clothes were soaked with floodwater and blood as he carried Emma into the bunker complex, her small body trembling with shock and hypothermia. Weber was gone, drowned in the maintenance facility while trying to save them both. Emma hadn't spoken since watching the water close over her father. Emma sat in the corner where Wick placed her, staring at nothing, her lips blue from cold and trauma. She clutched Weber's photograph. Somehow she'd kept it through the flooding, but showed no recognition when Wick spoke to her. Water still dripped from her pink headscarf onto the concrete floor, each drop echoing in the bunker's silence. "Emma." Wick knelt beside her, but she looked through him as if he didn't exist. Her small body shook with more than cold, the deep tremors of a mind that had retreated somewhere violence couldn't follow. "The evidence," Wick said, examining the steel cabinet marked with Soviet-era warnings. Inside were documents, photographs, bank records, everything Weber and Hans Richter had gathered about B&D corruption before Richter was murdered. But the bunker entrance was already echoing with approaching footsteps, not just surviving operatives, but a full B&D assault team with tactical equipment and authorization to eliminate all witnesses. Wick looked at Emma's catatonic form, then at the bunker's single entrance. No way to fight and protect her simultaneously. No way to run with a traumatized child who couldn't even respond to her own name. Just violence in confined spaces, while an 8-year-old watched with eyes that had already seen too much. "Stay here," he whispered to Emma, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Don't move." The first operative appeared at the bunker entrance with tactical confidence, probably expecting to find cowering civilians. Instead, he found Sam Wick holding a Wehrmacht bayonet that had been sharpened to razor keenness, standing between the entrance and a catatonic child. The blade opened the man's throat with surgical precision, blood fountained from the wound, spraying across concrete walls while the operative's life pumped out in rhythmic spurts. The man's body collapsed across the bunker threshold, twitching as his nervous system shut down. Emma didn't even flinch. The violence that should have terrified her barely registered in eyes that stared at Weber's photograph with absolute focus, as if she could will him back to life through concentration alone. "One down," Wick whispered, grabbing the dead operative's MP5 while checking the entrance for movement. Voices echoed through the bunker passages, rapid German coordination, tactical planning, the sound of more operatives moving through Cold War corridors that had witnessed decades of secrets and violence. The second operative tried stealth, slipping through shadows with night vision that turned the bunker into green-lit hunting ground. But Wick had positioned himself where ancient Wehrmacht ammunition crates created cover while maintaining sightlines to Emma's corner. The operative spotted Emma first, small, motionless, vulnerable. Perfect leverage against an American operative who'd already shown protective instincts toward children. "American," the operative called in accented English. "I have clear sight on the child. Drop your weapon." But when he stepped into the open to threaten Emma, Wick was already moving. The MP5 barked twice, suppressed rounds that punched through the operative's chest with kinetic energy that slammed him against concrete walls. Blood-painted ancient Nazi propaganda posters as the man slid to the floor. Emma's only reaction was to pull the photograph closer to her chest. "Two down." Wick breathed, but he could hear more movement in the passages, coordinated advance, multiple contacts, professional killers who'd learned from their colleagues' deaths. The remaining operatives coordinated through the bunker passages, probably calling for backup while using their colleagues' deaths to map defensive positions. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how desperate a man could become when protecting a child who'd already lost everything. The third operative used psychology as weapon, his voice echoing through concrete corridors with calculated cruelty. "She's just sitting there, American, staring at nothing. We know what trauma looks like. She'll never recover from what she's seen. Why not end her suffering now?" Wick's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, waiting in the shadows while the operative's voice continued its psychological assault. "Weber drowned because of you. You could have saved him, but you chose the child instead. How long before you make that choice again? How many more will die for one broken little girl?" The operative appeared at the bunker's secondary entrance, tactical gear, professional movement, weapon trained on Emma's motionless form. But he'd made the same mistake as his colleagues, focusing on the child instead of the predator protecting her. Wick's knife took him from behind, Wehrmacht steel sliding between vertebrae with surgical precision. The operative dropped without sound, his weapon clattering across concrete as neural pathways severed. When the third operative went still, Wick helped Emma through drainage tunnels that connected to Berlin's flood control system. She moved like a sleepwalker, responding to gentle pressure on her shoulders but showing no awareness of her surroundings. The photograph never left her grip. The water was waist-deep, contaminated with industrial runoff that burned exposed skin and filled the air with toxic vapors. Wick carried Emma when the current became too strong, her small body limp in his arms as toxic discharge swirled around them. Behind them, tactical lights cut through tunnel darkness as more operatives followed their trail. But Wick's hands found broken rebar, corroded steel that served as improvised weapon when the final B&D team caught up to them in the drainage system. The confrontation was brief, brutal, necessary. Emma sat in ankle-deep contaminated water, still clutching Weber's photograph, while Wick fought with desperate efficiency that turned drainage tunnels into an abattoir. When the last operative stopped moving, only their breathing broke the underground silence. "Emma," Wick said gently, kneeling in toxic water beside the girl who'd lost everything. "We have to go now. Can you walk?" She looked at him for the first time since the bunker, not recognition, but acknowledgement that he existed in her shattered world. "Papa's not coming back," she whispered, her first words since watching Weber drown. "No," Wick said honestly. "He's not coming back, but he loved you, and he wanted me to keep you safe." Emma nodded once, then stood on unsteady legs, still clutching the photograph that was all she had left of the only father she'd ever known. When it ended, only Wick and Emma remained alive in Berlin's underground darkness, surrounded by the dead and carrying weight that would follow them both for years to come. Chapter 6. The drainage tunnel opened onto the Spree River where Keisha waited with extraction equipment and medical supplies that couldn't repair psychological damage. Wick emerged from Berlin's underground carrying Emma's still form, both of them covered in Weber's blood and toxic discharge. Wick's face was a mask of controlled rage as he approached Keisha. Emma clutched Weber's photograph against her chest, staring at nothing while EMTs tried to assess her condition. "Mission accomplished," he said, his voice carrying deadly quiet fury as he handed over the flash drive. "Hope it was worth watching another child's world end." "Excellent work," Keisha replied, examining the device while EMTs checked Emma's condition. "Weber's evidence will provide excellent leverage against German intelligence cooperation." "Weber died protecting her," Wick said, looking at Emma's vacant stare. "Died trying to save his daughter's life." "Emma's not his daughter." Keisha's voice was matter-of-fact. The words hit Wick like a physical blow. He stared at Keisha, processing what he'd just heard. "What?" "Emma Richter. Her father was Hans Richter, BND intelligence analyst. He discovered the corruption, tried to expose it. Germans had him eliminated 36 months ago." Keisha's voice was clinical. "Weber promised Richter he'd protect the girl." Wick felt the ground shift beneath him. "You're lying." "Emma doesn't know. As far as she's concerned, Klaus Weber was her father. Richter died when she was 4.5. Car accident, officially. Weber took her in, told her he was her father. Simple cover story." Wick stared at Emma, seeing her clutch Weber's photograph with desperate love, mourning a man she believed was her father but who was actually the colleague who'd promised to protect her after her real father's murder. Jesus Christ. Wick's voice was hollow. She doesn't even know her both fathers are dead. What now? Emma becomes our responsibility now, Keisha said, watching the EMTs prepare sedatives for the catatonic child. Full medical care, experimental cancer therapy, psychological rehabilitation. The best facilities money can buy. Your responsibility. Wick's voice was deadly quiet. You knew the Germans murdered her real father and did nothing. You orchestrated her surrogate father's death, and now you'll raise her. Yes, we'll take care of her, Keisha corrected. Private treatment centers, specialized education, complete security. She'll want for nothing. Accept the truth. Wick looked at Emma's vacant stare. Accept knowing who her real father was. Accept understanding why Klaus Weber died for her. She'll understand operational necessity when she's old enough, Keisha replied. We have excellent programs for children in similar situations. Emma will be well cared for. Children in similar situations? Wick's voice cracked. How many orphans are you raising, Keisha? How many children whose parents have been murdered by intelligence operations? Enough to understand that sometimes sacrifice serves a greater purpose. What purposes? That's classified above your clearance level. Keisha's smile was cold. But Emma's unique background makes her valuable. Orphaned by intelligence operations, raised by intelligence operations, trained by intelligence operations. She'll understand loyalty in ways most people never could. The realization hit Wick like ice water. You're going to recruit her. When she's old enough, when she's ready, when she's been properly cured and prepared. Keisha watched the EMTs load Emma into the ambulance. Emma will have every advantage: education, training, purpose. She'll serve something larger than herself. She'll serve the people who allowed her father to be murdered and orchestrated her childhood's destruction. She'll serve her country, Keisha corrected, just like you do. She is not American. We are all immigrants, ain't we? Klaus Weber died for nothing, Wick said quietly, the full scope of the manipulation finally becoming clear. He wasn't selling secrets for his own child. He was trying to honor a promise to a murdered friend, and I let him die for it. His voice cracked with self-loathing. Weber made his choice, Weber made the only choice a decent man could make. Wick's control finally shattered. You knew about the murder of a whistleblower, allowed his daughter to be orphaned, manipulated his colleague into treason, then used me as your weapon to silence the last person who cared about the truth. And now Emma is ours, Keisha said simply. Completely ours. No family, no connections, no loyalties except what we build for her. She'll become exactly what we need her to become. But she's dying, the leukemia will be treated with the best medical care available. She'll receive every possible treatment. Wick understood now. Emma would grow up believing Klaus Weber had been her loving father who died protecting her. She'd never know about Hans Richter, never know about the corruption that got him killed, never know that the organization raising her had allowed both men who'd loved her to die. And when she was old enough, they'd turn her into another weapon. The next mission, Wick said, watching EMTs load Emma's unresponsive form into an ambulance that would take her to whatever facility TF-77 used to shape children into operatives. You'll get my call when you're ready, Keisha replied, her voice carefully neutral. For now, you need to rest and recover. Wick paused, studying Keisha's face with new understanding. How many more Klaus Webers have you sacrificed? How many more orphans have you harvested? You know what the difference is between you and the people we hunt. His voice was conversational now, which made it more terrifying than shouting. They don't murder children's fathers and call it operational security. Hans Richter chose to investigate things beyond his clearance level, Keisha said. Weber chose to honor a misguided promise. Emma will be better off not knowing any of it. Emma will be better off as your weapon? Wick looked at the catatonic child being loaded into an ambulance. Trained to kill for the people who destroyed her family? Emma will be better off with purpose, Keisha replied. With meaning, with the chance to serve something greater than herself. She's 8 years old and catatonic from trauma. How will she cope? She will. The drive, he said, holding up the flash drive. This evidence of BND corruption. How do I know it's real? You don't, Keisha replied honestly. Welcome to intelligence work, where truth is whatever serves operational objectives, and where children are products to be harvested from the wreckage of their parents' lives. Your transport leaves in 20 minutes. Go and get some rest. You've earned it. And Emma? Emma begins her new life tonight. Private facility in Switzerland, the same place where she'll receive her cancer treatment. Very discreet, very secure, very isolated from any inconvenient truths about her past. Very convenient, Wick said, understanding the full scope of TF-77's planning. Cure her cancer, erase her past, build her future, turn trauma into loyalty. Turn tragedy into purpose, Keisha corrected. Emma will have advantages most children never dream of. Like knowing that love gets you killed. Like knowing that sacrifice has meaning, that her survival serves something greater than personal happiness. Wick nodded, but he was thinking about Emma's catatonic stare, about Weber's final words, about the way TF-77 had turned him into exactly what they needed. Someone who could kill protectors while harvesting their children. Someone who could carry impossible choices while his conscience destroyed itself piece by piece. But understanding the game meant learning how to play it. And some debts, Wick was beginning to realize, could be paid in ways TF-77 never anticipated. Emma Weber, Emma Richter, deserved more than being molded into another weapon for the organization that had orchestrated her orphaning, and Klaus Weber's sacrifice deserved more than being used to acquire raw material for TF-77's recruitment programs. In the shadows where TF-77 operated, Sam Wick was becoming exactly what they needed him to become, a ghost who could complete impossible missions while carrying the weight of necessary choices. But TF-77 had made one mistake. They'd shown him exactly how the game was played. Now he could learn to play it better. Chapter 7. TF-77 Command Center, location classified. Andrew McAvoy sat alone in his office reviewing after-action reports when the secure phone rang. Not the red phone for operational emergencies, not the encrypted line for intelligence coordination, the black phone that existed for only one purpose. His hand hesitated over the receiver. In the shadow world of intelligence operations, certain names carried weight that could silence rooms and end careers. Mother was not one of those names. Mother was something beyond names, beyond the reach of conventional power structures that governed spy agencies and black operations. McAvoy had commanded TF-77 for 6 years, but he still didn't know who Mother was. No one did. Not the director of the CIA, not the heads of NSA or DIA, not even the president's intelligence briefers, who thought they understood the full scope of America's clandestine capabilities. The voice could belong to anyone. A former agency director, a defense contractor consortium, an AI system, or something else entirely. Gender, age, nationality, even humanity remained unknowable behind scramblers that stripped away every identifying characteristic. What McAvoy knew was Mother's reach. TF-77 operatives who asked too many questions simply disappeared, reassigned to irrelevance. Intelligence analysts who tried to trace Mother's communications found their careers systematically destroyed. Foreign services had spent years trying to identify the power behind American black operations that operated with impossible autonomy and unlimited resources, all failing. He answered on the 4th ring. McAvoy. The voice that responded was neither male nor female, processed through technology that could have been developed anywhere, anytime. Berlin operation, status report. McAvoy chose his words carefully. Mother appreciated precision, and Mother knew things that no single person should know. Operational details from rival agencies, classified programs from decades past, personal information about officers who thought their secrets were secure. Successful extraction of intelligence assets. Target eliminated. Operational objectives achieved. Samuel Wick, performance assessment. McAvoy pulled up Wick's file, noting the psychological evaluations that painted a picture of an operative still wrestling with conscience. Most terrifying about Mother was the patience, thinking in decades rather than quarters, designing operations that served strategic objectives that might not become apparent for years. Highly effective in combat scenarios, tactical adaptability excellent. Mission completion rate remains at 100%. He paused, considering how much truth Mother wanted. However, he continues to demonstrate emotional attachment to mission parameters, takes unauthorized actions when civilian casualties are involved, particularly children. Silence on the line, not dead air but the calculated quiet of something processing information through algorithms that measured human behavior like storm systems. Elaborate on unauthorized actions. Istanbul, abandoned sniper position to engage target at close range when child appeared in crosshairs. Berlin, actively protected target and civilian when German operatives attempted elimination. Both instances resulted in successful mission completion, but through methods that deviated from operational planning. Psychological assessment. McAvoy reviewed Keisha's notes, aware that Mother probably had access to files he'd never seen. In a world where information was power, Mother represented something beyond both. A presence that observed everything, influenced everything, and answered to no one except strategic necessities that America preferred not to acknowledge. Subject shows signs of moral conflict, but maintains operational effectiveness. Demonstrates protective instincts toward children that override tactical considerations. Handler assessment suggests emotional investment in civilian casualties may be increasing rather than decreasing with exposure. Another pause. McAvoy could hear nothing in the background, no ambient noise, no environmental sounds, nothing that might indicate where Mother operated from. The voice existed somewhere between guardian angel and digital god, protecting America through methods America preferred never to understand. Recommendations? Continue current assignment structure. Wick requires careful handling but remains our most effective field operative. His emotional responses, while tactically inconvenient, may serve psychological conditioning objectives. Explain. The subject's conscience creates internal conflict that forces him to make increasingly difficult moral choices. Each mission becomes a test of his operational commitment versus his personal ethics. He's developing the kind of moral flexibility we need while maintaining enough humanity to be psychologically useful. Has anything backfired? McAvoy considered the question carefully, knowing that Mother's knowledge extended into areas that should have been impossible to penetrate. Negative. Subject's unauthorized actions have consistently resulted in superior mission outcomes. His emotional investment appears to enhance rather than compromise operational effectiveness. Then continue current methodology. Increase moral complexity of assignments. Subject requires additional pressure to reach optimal psychological configuration. McAvoy felt the familiar chill that came with understanding Mother's true nature, not just commanding operations, but crafting human beings through carefully orchestrated trauma. Define additional pressure. Subject demonstrates protective instincts toward children. Exploit this. Design scenarios that force him to choose between mission objectives and civilian casualties with increasing frequency. Each choice should be more difficult than the last. And if he breaks? Then he wasn't suitable for our purposes. If he adapts, he becomes exactly what we need, an operative capable of making impossible choices while maintaining enough conscience to question orders when questioning serves our objectives. McAvoy understood. They weren't just training Wick to be a killer, they were crafting him into something more useful. Someone whose conscience could be weaponized against him when necessary, shaped through experiences that served purposes only Mother understood. Timeline for next assignment? 72 hours, Moscow. Russian oligarch financing terrorist operations through cryptocurrency networks. Subject has family, wife, 2 children, ages 6 and 9. both recently diagnosed with rare genetic condition requiring experimental treatment only available in Switzerland. The pattern was becoming clear. Mother wasn't just assigning missions. Mother was manufacturing moral dilemmas that would transform Wick into exactly what TF-77 needed him to become. Understood. Any specific parameters? Ensure subject understands the stakes. 300 civilians will die if the financing continues. Family treatment costs exceed the oligarch's liquid assets, forcing him to choose between his children's lives and enabling mass casualty terrorism. And if Wick refuses the assignment? He won't. Subject's psychological profile indicates he cannot refuse missions involving child casualties, even when those children belong to targets. His protective instincts override his moral objections. The line went dead without ceremony, leaving McAvoy staring at a phone that connected to nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. He looked at Wick's file again, at the psychological assessments that charted a man's gradual transformation through carefully orchestrated experiences. Mother's true terror wasn't power or knowledge. It was the patient cultivation of human weapons through psychological manipulation that spanned years. And the only certainty in the intelligence community's hierarchy of fear was that when the black phone rang, you answered. Because Mother occupied a position that existed outside every organizational chart, somewhere in the spaces between official acknowledgement and operational necessity, where America's darkest work was done by people who carried moral weight that others couldn't imagine. The cost of that protection, measured in compromised souls and traumatized consciences, was simply the price Mother was willing to pay, one damaged operative at a time. 3 weeks later. Wick stood outside the Swiss medical facility where Emma was receiving treatment, watching through reinforced glass as doctors worked to save a life that had already been destroyed in ways that medicine couldn't repair. The 8-year-old girl sat motionless in her hospital bed, staring at nothing with eyes that held too much knowledge. The experimental therapy was working, cancer cells responding to treatment that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But Emma hadn't spoken since Berlin, hadn't responded to doctors or nurses or child psychologists who tried to reach through trauma. "She's alive," Keisha said, joining Wick at the observation window. "The treatment is successful. Klaus's sacrifice saved her life." "Did it?" Wick asked, watching Emma's empty expression. "Or did we just preserve her body while destroying everything that made her human?" Through the glass, Emma was clutching a photograph, Weber smiling at her during some happier moment before cancer and intelligence wars had consumed both their lives. The only father she'd known, reduced to memory and bloodstains. "Your next mission briefing is ready," Keisha said. "Moscow, a Russian oligarch who's—" "I know, financing terrorist operations through cryptocurrency exchanges. The threat is real, the stakes are—" Wick again cut her off. "The circumstances may be influenced by operational considerations, like every other mission." Keisha's reflection showed something that might have been approval or possibly concern that her asset was developing too much insight into TF-77's methods. "You're learning. I'm understanding that every mission is a test disguised as necessity, that TF-77 creates the moral choices they use to shape operatives. And what do you think we need you to become?" Wick looked at Emma's motionless form, at the photograph of a dead man she'd never stop mourning, at damage that medicine could treat but never heal. "Someone who can carry this weight without breaking, someone who can make impossible choices and still function afterward. Someone who can serve a purpose larger than personal ethics." Through the glass, Emma finally moved, a small gesture toward the photograph, fingers tracing Weber's face with gentle reverence. "The Moscow mission," Wick said. "How many children will it cost?" "Unknown, but stopping terrorist financing will save hundreds of lives. And if the oligarch has a family, then you'll have choices to make." Wick nodded, understanding that TF-77's true mission wasn't eliminating threats or gathering intelligence. They were creating operatives who could navigate moral complexity while maintaining enough humanity to be useful. enough conscience to question orders, enough flexibility to complete missions that existed in spaces between necessary and unthinkable. When do I leave? Tomorrow, but Wick... Keisha's reflection showed something almost human, almost regretful. Emma will recover. Children are stronger than we think. Wick watched the 8-year-old girl who'd been orphaned by intelligence wars, who'd witnessed violence that would fuel nightmares for years, who'd been used as strategic leverage by people who saw love as a tactical advantage. Numbered children are exactly as fragile as we think. We just choose to break them anyway. He sighed, and then walked away from the observation window, away from Emma's empty stare, away from the Swiss medical facility that could heal bodies but not souls. Tomorrow he would fly to Moscow for another mission that would test moral boundaries while serving strategic objectives. Behind him, through reinforced glass, an 8-year-old girl held a photograph of a dead father and stared at nothing with eyes that had learned too much about how quickly love could become loss. In the shadows where TF-77 operated, Sam Wick was becoming exactly what they needed him to become. The cost, measured in children's silence and dead men's blood, was simply the price of protecting America's interests. The execution always came with costs that echoed through quiet moments for years to come. Thank you for listening. Wick Redact by Chase Austin, brought to you by Thrillverse Media. The adventure continues in the next explosive installment of the Wick Files, and we hope you'll join us for the next thrilling chapter. We also invite you to explore Chase Austin's other series and characters like Sam Wick action thrillers, Axel Monk action thrillers, Creed and Hart crime thrillers, Freelancer action thrillers, and Aria Hunt FBI crime thrillers, as well as a ton of free short stories and bonus content on our website, thechaseaustin.com. We appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to having you with us again soon.